The grand amphitheater of scale stretched across the capital world of the Lizardkind Empire like a massive golden crown, its polished surfaces reflecting the light of twin suns. For 300 years, the Tournament of Supremacy had been held here, and for 300 years, the reptilian species had dominated every competition. Their scaled champions stood 10 feet tall, their muscles rippling beneath armor-like skin, their eyes cold and calculating as predators. Supreme Commander Vex stood at the center of the arena, his emerald scales catching the light as he addressed the gathered representatives of 47 species. His voice carried the authority of absolute power, each word dripping with condescension. The Tournament of Supremacy begins in 7 solar cycles, he announced, his forked tongue flicking between razor-sharp teeth. As always, the Lizardkind Empire will demonstrate why we are the rightful rulers of this galaxy. The assembled delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The crystalline hive mind buzzed with nervous energy. The gaseous collective swirled in patterns of anxiety. Even the proud warrior cats of Andromeda kept their heads lowered. Everyone knew the outcome before the tournament even began. That's when the human delegation requested permission to speak. Commander Jake stepped forward, his modest height of 6 feet making him appear almost childlike compared to the towering reptilians around him. His brown hair was unremarkable, his simple military uniform lacking the ornate decorations that adorned other species representatives. He looked, by all accounts, utterly ordinary. The Terran Federation requests entry into the Tournament of Supremacy, Jake said, his voice steady despite the rumbling laughter that erupted from the Lizardkind delegation. Supreme Commander Vex's yellow eyes narrowed to slits. "Human," he hissed, "your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. You possess no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no superior intellect. What could you possibly offer in a competition designed for true warriors?" Jake met his gaze without flinching. "We offer what we've always offered, the willingness to try." The laughter grew louder. Several Lizardkind generals slapped their tails against the floor in amusement. The sound echoed through the amphitheater like thunder. "Very well," Vex said, his voice dripping with mock generosity. "In the spirit of entertainment, we shall grant humanity 1 seat, 1 competitor, 1 chance to embarrass yourselves before the entire galaxy." The other species delegates exchanged glances. Some felt pity for the humans, others saw it as foolish pride. The Lizardkind Empire had never lost a single event in the tournament's history. Their competitors were genetically engineered perfection, trained from hatching in the arts of war, strategy, and physical dominance. Jake nodded solemnly. 1 seat will be sufficient." As the formal proceedings concluded and delegates began to disperse, Jake remained standing in the center of the arena. The twin suns cast long shadows across the golden floor, and for a moment, he was alone with his thoughts. The magnitude of what lay ahead wasn't lost on him. The Tournament of Supremacy consisted of 7 grueling challenges, each designed to test different aspects of superior species development. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-Fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring these front lines to you. Behind him, Supreme Commander Vex watched with calculating eyes. The human's calm acceptance troubled him more than he cared to admit. In his experience, species facing certain defeat either raged with futile defiance or cowered in submission. This human did neither. "Sir," one of Vex's lieutenants approached, "shall we prepare the standard tournament protocols?" Vex continued studying Jake's retreating form. "Yes, but add extra medical facilities. I have a feeling we'll need them for our human guest." The lieutenant's scales rippled with amusement. "Surely you don't expect the primitive to survive the first challenge?" "I expect nothing from primitives," Vex replied, though his tone carried less certainty than his words. "But I've learned that underestimating one's opponent, no matter how inferior, is the first step toward unexpected complications." As the great amphitheater emptied and the twin suns set behind the horizon, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of strength. intelligence, and the true meaning of supremacy. The preparation compound buzzed with activity as the tournament's opening ceremony approached. Massive Lizardkind warriors moved through their training routines with mechanical precision, their movements creating thunderous impacts that shook the reinforced floors. Each competitor stood as a testament to their species' genetic superiority, their scales gleaming like polished armor, their eyes reflecting the cold calculation of apex predators. Jake sat quietly in the corner designated for his species, a space so small it seemed more like an afterthought than a genuine preparation area. His equipment consisted of standard military gear, nothing enhanced or genetically modified. No powered armor, no chemical stimulants, no technological implants. Just basic human ingenuity and whatever he could carry in a regulation pack. The Lizardkind competitors made no effort to hide their amusement. General Crack, a massive specimen even by their standards, approached Jake with deliberate slowness, his claws clicking against the metal floor. "Human," Crack's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I almost feel pity for your species. To send one small soft creature to represent your entire civilization ... It borders on tragic comedy." Jake looked up from the equipment he was organizing, his expression neutral. "Every species has its strengths, General. Perhaps the tournament will reveal them." This response drew more laughter from the assembled reptilians. Commander Sis, whose silver scales marked her as a champion of previous tournaments, joined the growing circle around Jake. "Strengths?" she hissed, her forked tongue testing the air. "What strengths could a species possess that requires artificial atmospheres to survive, clothing to regulate temperature, and tools to accomplish what others do with natural abilities?" "Adaptability," Jake replied simply, continuing his methodical preparation. The word hung in the air like a challenge, though the Lizardkind competitors seemed unable to comprehend its significance. They had never needed to adapt. Their species had evolved to near perfection millions of years ago, their physical and mental capabilities honed to razor sharpness. Through genetic manipulation and selective breeding, Supreme Commander Vex observed the interaction from his elevated platform, his yellow eyes never leaving the human. Something about Jake's calm demeanor disturbed him. The human showed no fear, no apparent concern about the insurmountable odds he faced. Instead, he seemed to be studying everything around him with quiet intensity. The first challenge was announced. The Labyrinth of Trials. A massive maze filled with physical obstacles, mental puzzles, and combat scenarios, all designed to test the complete warrior. Previous tournaments had seen competitors spend days within its walls, some emerging victorious, others carried out on stretchers. As the competitors gathered at the labyrinth's entrance, the differences between species became even more apparent. The Lizardkind warriors towered over everyone else, their natural armor gleaming, their weapons integrated into their very biology. Beside them, Jake looked almost absurdly small and vulnerable. "The rules are simple," Vex announced to the assembled crowd of spectators. "Enter the labyrinth at dawn. The first to reach the center and retrieve the victory crystal wins. There are no other rules." The implication was clear. Anything could happen within those walls. The Lizardkind had designed the labyrinth to favor their natural advantages. Brute force could smash through barriers. Enhanced senses could detect hidden traps. Superior intellect could solve complex puzzles. What chance did a human have? As the competitors took their positions, Jake noticed something interesting. The Lizardkind warriors were spacing themselves apart, each planning to tackle the labyrinth as an individual challenge. They had never learned to work together because they had never needed to. The starting signal echoed across the arena. 37 Lizardkind warriors charged into the labyrinth with roars of confidence, their massive forms disappearing into the maze's shadowy depths. Jake waited a moment, observing the various entry points and the directions his competitors had chosen. Then, moving with deliberate purpose, he selected an entrance that every other competitor had ignored. It was smaller, more difficult to navigate, seemingly leading in the wrong direction. As he stepped into the maze, Jake pulled out a small device from his pack, not a weapon or scanner, but something far more humble, a piece of chalk behind him. The spectators settled in for what they assumed would be a short, brutal demonstration of human inadequacy. They had no idea they were about to witness something unprecedented in the tournament's 300-year history. Supreme Commander Vex leaned forward in his throne, his instincts telling him that something was different about this competition. The human's choice of entrance, his methodical approach, the way he had observed before acting, it all suggested a strategy that no Lizardkind competitor had ever employed. This should be interesting, Vex murmured to himself, though he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was about to discover exactly how interesting. Within the labyrinth of trials, chaos reigned supreme. The thunderous sounds of Lizardkind warriors smashing through walls echoed throughout the maze, their raw strength turning the carefully designed obstacles into mere inconveniences. General Crack had already torn through 3 barrier walls, his massive claws leaving deep gouges in the reinforced stone. Commander Sis had detected and disarmed a dozen traps using her enhanced senses, her scales rippling with satisfaction at each easy victory. But Jake was nowhere to be seen. The human had vanished into the maze's depths, following a path that seemed to lead away from the central prize. While his competitors focused on direct routes and brute force solutions, Jake was methodically mapping the labyrinth structure. The chalk he carried left small marks at key intersections, creating a navigation system that would have been meaningless to the Lizardkind warriors, but made perfect sense to a human mind trained in systematic thinking. Supreme Commander Vex watched the competition feeds with growing confusion. The monitoring crystals showed his warriors making excellent progress, their individual prowess allowing them to overcome obstacle after obstacle. But the human's feed showed something different entirely, a careful, almost leisurely exploration of seemingly irrelevant passages. Is the human lost? Asked Lieutenant Zek, peering at the crystal display. He appears to be moving away from the objective. Vex's yellow eyes narrowed. Perhaps. Or perhaps he sees something we do not. 3 hours into the competition, the first signs of Jake's strategy became apparent. While the Lizardkind warriors had focused on speed and individual achievement, Jake had been studying the labyrinth's design principles. The maze wasn't just a series of random obstacles, it was a complex system with patterns, redundancies, and interconnected elements that could be exploited. At the maze's center, the victory crystal pulsed with ethereal light, waiting for the first competitor to claim it. The direct routes were heavily fortified, designed to test the limits of even the most superior warrior. But Jake had discovered something the maze's designers had never intended: maintenance passages. The labyrinth required upkeep, and the ancient maintenance tunnels, long forgotten by the Lizardkind, provided alternate routes that bypassed the most dangerous obstacles. These passages were too small for the massive reptilian warriors, but perfectly sized for a human. As General Crack battled a mechanical guardian in the maze's outer ring, Jake slipped through a maintenance shaft that led directly to the inner sanctum. His small size, which had seemed like such a disadvantage, now became his greatest asset. But the real revelation came when Jake reached the crystal chamber. The victory crystal wasn't just sitting on a pedestal, it was the heart of an intricate puzzle that required multiple simultaneous actions to solve. The Lizardkind had designed it assuming that the strongest individual would claim the prize. They had never considered that someone might approach it differently. Jake studied the mechanism for several minutes, his human mind recognizing patterns that the Lizardkind had overlooked. The puzzle required coordination between multiple points, precise timing, and the ability to think in 3 dimensions simultaneously. It was designed to be impossible for a single individual to solve, unless that individual was human. Jake pulled out a collection of simple tools from his pack: mirror fragments, string, and small weights. While the Lizardkind competed with natural weapons and enhanced abilities, Jake used human ingenuity. He created a simple mechanical system using the mirrors to redirect light beams, the string to connect distant switches, and the weights to maintain constant pressure on multiple activation points. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, using basic physics principles that the Lizardkind had overlooked in their focus on individual supremacy. As the final mechanism clicked into place, the victory crystal rose from its housing, glowing with triumphant light. Outside the maze, the spectators watched in stunned silence as the competition crystals announced the impossible: the human had won. General Crack, still fighting his mechanical guardian, roared in disbelief. Commander Sis, 90% of the way through her chosen route, stopped dead in her tracks. 35 other Lizardkind warriors found themselves suddenly competing for second place in a competition they had considered already won. Supreme Commander Vex rose from his throne, his scales shifting to darker shades of confusion and concern. How is this possible? He demanded. The answer came when Jake emerged from the labyrinth, victory crystal in hand, his simple human appearance unchanged by his impossible achievement. He hadn't relied on superior strength, enhanced senses, or genetic advantages. He had simply looked at the problem from a different perspective. The maze was designed beautifully, Jake said as he presented the crystal to the judging panel. It must have taken incredible engineering skill to create something so complex. The compliment, delivered without irony or mockery, somehow made the defeat even more humiliating for the Lizardkind. They had been beaten not by a superior opponent, but by someone who had simply thought differently about the challenge. As the crowd processed what they had witnessed, Jake prepared for the next challenge, seemingly unaware that he had just accomplished something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be truly superior. The second challenge, the trial of mental supremacy, was meant to restore Lizardkind honor after the embarrassing defeat in the labyrinth. The arena's central platform had been transformed into a complex strategic battleground where competitors would command holographic armies in real-time warfare simulations. For 3 centuries, Lizardkind generals had dominated these mental contests, their tactical brilliance overwhelming every other species with mathematical precision and ruthless efficiency. Supreme Commander Vex personally oversaw the preparation, his confidence shaken but not broken. The humans' victory in the labyrinth had been unexpected, but surely it was a fluke. Mental combat was the core of Lizardkind superiority. Their enhanced neural pathways could process thousands of tactical variables simultaneously. Their strategic thinking refined through millions of years of evolutionary warfare. Jake stood at his command console, dwarfed by the massive interfaces designed for reptilian physiology. The other competitors loomed over their stations like predators, preparing for a hunt, their eyes calculating optimal strategies before the simulation even began. "The scenario is simple," General Crack announced, his voice still bitter from the labyrinth defeat. "Each competitor commands identical forces. The Fengdu. Last army standing wins. Pure strategy, no tricks, no hidden passages." The emphasis on those last words carried obvious disdain. As the simulation began, 37 Lizardkind commanders immediately launched into aggressive military doctrines that had proven successful for millennia. They formed perfect battle lines, executed flawless flanking maneuvers, and demonstrated tactical coordination that left other species, military observers taking notes. Jake's approach was different. While his competitors focused on engaging each other in direct combat, Jake seemed to be exploring the simulation's environmental features. He moved his forces to defensive positions and began studying the virtual terrain with the same methodical attention he had shown in the labyrinth. "The human is stalling," observed Commander Sis, her silver scales rippling with amusement. "He cannot match our tactical superiority, so he delays the inevitable." But Supreme Commander Vex was beginning to recognize a pattern. "He's not stalling," Vex said quietly. "He's learning." The realization hit just as Jake's strategy became apparent. While the Lizardkind commanders battled each other with conventional tactics, Jake had been studying the simulation's resource management system. The virtual environment contained elements that could be manipulated, exploited, and turned into advantages that the original programmers had never intended. Jake began implementing guerrilla tactics that were completely foreign to Lizardkind military doctrine. Instead of meeting his opponents in direct combat, he used the environment as a weapon. He diverted virtual rivers to flood enemy positions, triggered avalanches to block mountain passes, and employed hit-and-run tactics that frustrated the methodical approach of his reptilian opponents. More importantly, Jake did something that no Lizardkind commander had ever attempted. He began forming alliances with other competitors. While the reptilian warriors saw the simulation as a contest of individual supremacy, Jake approached it as a complex social and political challenge. He sent diplomatic messages to smaller armies, offering mutual defense pacts and resource-sharing agreements. He helped weaker competitors defend against stronger ones, creating a network of allies who began to see cooperation as preferable to certain defeat. The Lizardkind commanders watched in growing frustration as their superior forces became bogged down in asymmetrical warfare. Their tactical brilliance was designed for conventional combat between organized armies, not the chaotic, unpredictable strategies that Jake was employing. "This is not how warfare is conducted," General Crack roared as his forces were harassed by coordinated hit-and-run attacks. "Stand and fight with honor." But Jake's allies had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes survival required abandoning traditional concepts of honor in favor of practical results. They began adopting human tactics, using stealth, deception, and environmental manipulation to level the playing field. The simulation that was supposed to demonstrate Lizardkind supremacy became a masterclass in human military philosophy. Jake's coalition of smaller armies, working together with unconventional tactics, began systematically eliminating the larger Lizardkind forces. Supreme Commander Vex watched the proceedings with growing alarm. The human wasn't just winning, he was changing the fundamental nature of the competition. The other species were learning from him, adapting human strategies to their own capabilities. When the simulation ended, Jake's coalition controlled 70% of the virtual territory. The Lizardkind commanders, despite their individual tactical superiority, had been outmaneuvered by cooperative strategy and adaptive thinking. The arena fell silent as the results were announced. For the second time in as many challenges, human had achieved the impossible. But this victory was different. It wasn't just about Jake's success, but about the way he had transformed his opponent's understanding of what was possible. As the competitors prepared for the third challenge, whispers spread through the assembled delegates. Other species began to reconsider their own assumptions about strength and superiority. The crystalline hive mind buzzed with new patterns of thought. The gaseous collective swirled with possibilities they had never considered. Supreme Commander Vex remained outwardly calm, but inside, something fundamental was shifting. The human wasn't just winning competitions, he was demonstrating that the Lizardkind Empire's entire philosophy of supremacy might be built on flawed assumptions. The third challenge would test physical endurance, surely an area where reptilian advantages could not be overcome by human cleverness. But as Vex looked at Jake's quiet confidence, he began to wonder if there were aspects of endurance that his species had never truly understood. The final challenge, the Crucible of Ultimate Endurance, was designed to be the ultimate test of superior evolution. Competitors would face a gauntlet of physical trials in an environment that simulated the most hostile conditions in the galaxy. Crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, toxic atmosphere, and depleted oxygen levels. The Lizardkind had never lost this event because their natural adaptations made them nearly invincible in harsh environments. Jake stood at the starting line, his breathing apparatus and environmental suit looking primitive compared to the natural, biological advantages of his reptilian competitors. The Lizardkind warriors needed no artificial support. Their scales provided armor, their enhanced cardiovascular systems processed oxygen more efficiently, and their muscular structure was designed for extreme physical stress. Supreme Commander Vex made the announcement personally, his voice carrying across the arena with grim finality. The Crucible will test everything that makes a species truly superior. Natural strength, evolutionary adaptation, and the will to survive when all artificial advantages are stripped away. The irony wasn't lost on Jake. The Lizardkind considered human technology a weakness, never realizing that the ability to create tools was itself a natural human advantage. As the trial began, 37 Lizardkind warriors charged into the hostile environment with characteristic aggression. Their scales immediately adapted to the temperature extremes, their enhanced lungs processed the thin atmosphere, and their muscular systems powered through the increased gravity field. Jake's approach was different. He moved slowly, conserving energy, and studying the environment's patterns. While his competitors relied on brute force to overcome obstacles, Jake used efficiency and planning. He rationed his oxygen, planned his routes to minimize energy expenditure, and employed techniques that maximized his limited biological advantages. But the real test came when the environment began to change. The Crucible was designed to escalate, presenting increasingly difficult challenges that would push even Lizardkind physiology to its limits. Gravity increased, temperatures fluctuated wildly, and the atmospheric composition became progressively more toxic. The Lizardkind warriors began to struggle. Their natural adaptations, while impressive, had limits. They had evolved for specific environmental conditions, and when those conditions exceeded their biological parameters, they had no alternatives. Jake, however, had something his competitors lacked: the ability to adapt his behavior rather than relying solely on biological adaptation. When the gravity increased beyond human tolerance, he modified his movement patterns. When the atmosphere became toxic, he adjusted his breathing techniques. When the temperature fluctuations threatened to overwhelm his suit systems, he found environmental niches that provided natural protection. Hour by hour, the Lizardkind competitors began to fall behind. Their superior physical capabilities couldn't overcome the fact that they had never learned to think beyond their natural advantages. They were evolutionary perfection trapped within the limits of their own biology. Jake, meanwhile, continued his steady progress through the crucible. He wasn't faster or stronger than his competitors, but he was more adaptable. Every obstacle became a problem to be solved, rather than a barrier to be overcome through force. The turning point came when the environment shifted to its final, most brutal phase. The Crucible's designers had created conditions that should have been impossible for any species to survive, a combination of extreme factors that would challenge every known form of life. The remaining Lizardkind warriors found themselves in an environment that exceeded their evolutionary parameters. Their natural adaptations, so perfectly suited for their original world, became limitations in this artificial extreme. Jake faced the same impossible conditions, but approached them differently. He didn't try to overcome the environment, he found ways to work with it. He used the extreme temperatures to create air currents for easier movement. He employed the toxic atmosphere's chemical properties to power emergency systems in his suit. He turned the crushing gravity into an advantage by using it to assist in controlled descents. When Jake emerged from the Crucible as the sole survivor, the silence in the arena was deafening. He had accomplished something that defied every assumption about biological superiority. The human had not just won, he had redefined what it meant to be adapted for survival. Supreme Commander Vex stared at the impossible scene before him. The human stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily but victorious, while the pride of the Lizardkind Empire lay defeated behind him. The implications were staggering. Jake removed his helmet and addressed the assembled delegates, his voice carrying clearly across the vast amphitheater. I didn't win because humans are superior to other species. I won because humans learned long ago that our strength doesn't come from being the biggest or the strongest, or the most perfectly adapted. Our strength comes from our ability to change, to learn, and to work together. He looked directly at Supreme Commander Vex. Your species achieved perfection millions of years ago. That perfection became a limitation. You stopped growing, stopped adapting, stopped learning. You became prisoners of your own superiority. The words struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Representatives from dozens of species began to see their own civilizations in a new light. How many of them had also become trapped within the boundaries of their own assumed superiority? Supreme Commander Vex descended from his throne, his scales shifting through patterns of confusion and something approaching humility. What do you propose, human? Jake smiled, the expression transforming his ordinary features into something that radiated hope. I propose that we all start learning from each other. The galaxy is vast enough for many different kinds of strength. Your species' tactical brilliance, combined with human adaptability, could solve problems that neither of us could handle alone. The tournament of supremacy had ended, but something far more significant had begun. The rigid hierarchy that had dominated galactic politics for centuries was crumbling, replaced by the possibility of cooperation and mutual growth. As delegates from across the galaxy began to approach Jake with offers of cultural exchange and collaborative research, Supreme Commander Vex realized that the human had given them something more valuable than victory, the chance to grow beyond their limitations. The Lizardkind Empire would never be the same. But perhaps, Vex thought as he watched the unprecedented scene of interspecies cooperation unfolding before him, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The galaxy had learned that true superiority wasn't about being the strongest or the most perfect. It was about the wisdom to keep growing, adapting, and learning from others. And in that lesson, humanity had found its place among the stars.